So, Lone Rider here with a fairly vintage RockShox Judy fork, and I just wanted to say a word about working on your mountain bike, especially if it's an older bike, whether it's something you consider old school or vintage, or whether it's mid school or sort of not quite old school but not quite new. The travel on your front fork will vary based on the era the bike hails from. Newer bikes have a lot more front travel, and basically what that means is you have to be careful to put on the right size fork. It's not just a question of the steer length, that you're going to have enough height for the head tube of your frame and then to attach the stem, and also to make sure you have however many spacers you desire. It's not just a question of the diameter of the steer, is it 1 inch, is it 1 1/8, is it a tapered steer, and it's not just a question of is it threaded or threadless. There is essentially the question of the travel of the fork, because what that's going to do is that's going to affect the head tube angle and ultimately the standover height and ultimately the handling characteristics of your bike. Essentially, a fork with too much travel is going to jack up the bike. A fork that doesn't have enough travel is going to drop down the front end of the bike. And I find that when you're working on older bikes especially, the temptation is to just go out and get your hands on the nicest, newest, lightest fork, but usually the travel in the fork is prohibitive in terms of interacting with the way the bike frame is designed and for what sort of fork length the bike frame is designed for. Keep in mind that at the time these bikes were designed, there was usually a certain amount of fork travel that was basically the industry standard. There was some variation. You could usually set up the forks with, different, slightly different amounts of travel, but there was usually a range that was normal for that time period. And if the bike hails from that time period, it's designed to work with that amount of travel up to a certain point and no more. If you put a short travel, old style fork on a modern bike, you're going to drop it down, you're going to affect the handling, you're going to affect the pedal clearance, you're going to affect the standover height, frame angles, everything. Similarly, if your fork is too tall, it's going to jack up the bike and it's going to affect all those same things as well. So when you're working on an older bike, like I often am, just keep in mind these things, and keep in mind that it's not just making sure your fork physically fits in the bike. It's a question of that your fork is designed for the type of bike that you're working on and vice versa. So, Lone Rider out.